What was it like to listen to the radio on the evening of 9/11, 2001? The following is what was on the radio that evening.
The president, speaking from the Oval Office in a nationally broadcast address, promised to commit the full resources of the nation's intelligence and law enforcement communities to find the terrorists and bring them to justice. President Bush says the terrorist attacks today were supposed to frighten the country into chaos and retreat, but they have failed. Bush says the attacks, carried out with hijacked planes, ended thousands of lives through what he called evil and despicable acts of terror. He said U.S. authorities won't distinguish between those who committed the acts and those who harbored those individuals. A firefighters union official says he fears an estimated 200 firefighters alone have died in rescue efforts at the World Trade Center. A pair of apparently hijacked jetliners crashed into the Twin Towers this morning, eventually causing both to collapse along with another building in the complex. Another jetliner hit the Pentagon. The federal government is on its highest alert after today's deadly terror attacks. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld says the Pentagon, the scene of one of the attacks, is functioning and will be in business tomorrow. Attorney General John Ashcroft is condemning today's terror attacks in New York as the greatest tragedies ever witnessed. Speaking at the White House, Ashcroft said authorities will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to find the people responsible. From the functioning and will be in business tomorrow. Attorney General John Ashcroft is condemning today's terror attacks in New York as the greatest tragedies ever witnessed. Speaking at the White House, Ashcroft said authorities will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to find the people responsible. From the 24-hour News Center, I'm Paul Crockett.
Say the plane he was on was being hijacked. NPR's Ken Barkas is at the scene of the crash in a remote area of south-central Pennsylvania.
I'm looking at a crater that looks like about 15 to 20 feet deep, maybe 50 feet wide. There is just an amazing army of inspectors here and investigators, and everyone from postal inspectors to FBI, FAA, ATF, hazmat crews. There's cadaver dogs on the scene. One state police official who went to the scene said he did not see any piece left of the plane that was larger than a phone book. They say it's a huge crime scene area. They're considering a 3 to 5 mile crime scene area that they've cordoned off.
NPR's Ken Barkas. There were 38 passengers and 7 crew members on the United flight. Thousands of New York City firefighters and police officers scrambled to respond to the attacks. Many lost their lives when the buildings collapsed. An estimated 200 firefighters may have died, and as many as 80 police officers are believed to be missing today. Up to 11,000 firefighters eventually responded to the attacks. You're listening to news from National Public Radio. Controllers at Dulles International Airport watched an unidentified jet fly at high speeds toward the White House before veering suddenly and crashing into the Pentagon. That's according to a report in the online edition of the Washington Post. NPR's John Nielsen has more.
The Post report says the traffic controllers could not identify the jet because someone on board had turned off a piece of equipment called the transponder, which transmits the plane's flight number, speed, and altitude. The plane was an American Airlines jet that was hijacked shortly after taking off from the Washington area airport. It was en route to Los Angeles. Sources told the Post that the plane dropped below radar level before it hit the Pentagon. It appeared to be flying at full speed. Federal officials have confirmed that the transponders on all 4 of the crashed planes appear to have been turned off. The plane that hit the Pentagon was carrying 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. John Nielsen, NPR News, Washington.
For the first time ever, the Federal Aviation Administration grounded all commercial aircraft. Normal flights will not resume before noon Eastern Time tomorrow at the earliest. U.S. aviation officials say all U.S. commercial aircraft not involved in today's attacks were safely on the ground shortly thereafter. Between 40 and 50 scheduled flights landed at various U.S. airports, leaving no domestic airliners in U.S. airspace. World leaders reacted with horror to the news. German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder said the deeds were a declaration of war against the civilized world, while the West and Russia urged unprecedented solidarity. No one took immediate responsibility for what a European Union leader equated with Pearl Harbor and with what Norway called the worst terrorist attack in history. I'm Frank Stasio, NPR News in Washington. This is special coverage from NPR News of today's terrorist attacks in New York City and in Washington. In Washington, I'm Noah Adams.
And I'm Linda Wertheimer.
And in New York, I'm Robert Siegel. Today, the United States was hit by the worst terrorist act in history. 4 commercial jets were hijacked and crashed into civilian and military targets, 2 into the World Trade Center in New York City, 1 into the Pentagon outside Washington, D.C. Another plane crashed in rural Pennsylvania, 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Hundreds of people were aboard the planes that crashed, and the death toll could be in the thousands. Moments ago, President George W. Bush addressed the nation from the White House. He said that after the first attack, he implemented the nation's emergency response plan.
Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
President Bush spoke at the White House tonight.
We're joined now by NPR's White House correspondent Don Gagné and our Justice Department correspondent Barbara Bradley. Barbara, let's start with you. What do we know about the investigation that the president has said will be ongoing from this point?
Well, as you just heard, the president said that all of the Justice Department and FBI's and many, many other agencies, actually, all of these resources are going to be deployed. And we are beginning to hear some details. Ashcroft said, Attorney General John Ashcroft said that on one of the planes, the hijackers had knives. Then we know that on another flight, the American Airlines flight that crashed into the Pentagon, we know that the hijackers had knives there. We're beginning to kind of hear little details here and there. But we're going to be seeing a very concerted effort over the next, obviously, round the clock. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be hearing a little bit more about details that come out from, for example, cell phones. Several people made cell phone calls, and so the investigators are going to be talking to the people who received those phone calls, listening to them. They're going to be trying to get clues as to who the hijackers were, trying to trace them to Osama bin Laden or whoever they believe that is. So things are just going to be coming out little by little.
At some level, this is about plane crashes, and there's always evidence about what happened to airplanes. Do you think these investigators have any hope of finding the black boxes?
Well, those black boxes are pretty sturdy. They seem to endure quite a bit. I know that they're going to be looking for them. It's interesting. I was talking to someone a little bit earlier today, and what they said is, there's going to be, yes, it looks like they were all burned up, but there's also going to be a lot of evidence. Not only evidence at the crime scene, but also evidence in other places. For example, they are going to take all those boarding passes and they will scan them for fingerprints. And somewhere in an international database, there may be the fingerprints of the hijackers. They will be looking for things like that, both at the crime scene and off the crime scene.
Where pilots were trained, where they could have found people who might have been able to fly these aircraft.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it seems pretty clear that the hijackers were also, at least 2 on each plane, were also pilots. The reason is no American pilot would fly into the World Trade Center. So that means that these pilots were trained somewhere, and in all likelihood in the United States or in Western Europe, because the simulators that are needed to train those pilots are in those places. What that probably means is that they are certified and that those pilots are on a list somewhere. So what people think is that they're going to focus on the pilots first.
Don Gagne, the president, spoke to the nation just a few minutes ago. The thrust of what he said.
It was a balance he was trying to strike. That resolve that the United States, that this country will do what it takes to hunt down these people, to proceed with this investigation that Barbara's describing, and then the reassurance to the American public that even though this was a horrible attack on this country's freedoms, that it cannot be viewed as a setback, that this country will not go into retreat, that the federal government will be functioning tomorrow, that the Congress will be in business tomorrow, that the American economy, he said, will be open for business tomorrow.
The president talked about good and evil when he was discussing these hijackers, and he talked about dealing equally with the people who hijacked these aircraft or who planned the hijackings of these aircraft and those who harbor them, which sounds, I assume, like states that have been hiding or permitting the terrorist activity within their borders.
It was probably the strongest language of the president's remarks tonight. That this is not just individuals we are going after. He seemed to be saying that these people have support, and we will find out who is supporting them. And if that is state support, though he didn't use that word explicitly, then there will be repercussions.
Thanks very much, Don.
Thank you.
NPR's Don Gagne, NPR's Barbara Bradley. Thank you both.
Welcome.
Carrie Nolan is a reporter for member station WNYC, and right now she is in Atlantic Highlands in New Jersey. The harbor there is packed with thousands of people, medical personnel, police, firefighters. Carrie Nolan, I understand that a triage unit has been set up where you are. What's going on there?
Well, right now it looks like medical personnel from practically all over New Jersey have amassed in this very small town on the Sandy Hook Bay. They've set up several tents, triage tents, and they've actually been ferrying people from New York all day long. Mostly this afternoon it's been ambulatory patients who were examined and either treated on the scene or sent to area hospitals. They were also, some of them were sent to decontamination units where they were just hosed down with water to remove asbestos particles that were clinging to their skin and clothing. So this has been sort of an ongoing thing. We're getting word now that more critically injured people are due in on ferry boats probably in about an hour or so.
More
we'll
people,
see what
you
happens
say?
then. I'm sorry?
More people are still coming in.
Yes, sir. More people are coming in, and they're expected to come in probably for most of the night.
Do the people who are running the triage center give any sense to reporters there whether the people they're treating were actually inside the World Trade Center and managed to get out before the explosion, or might they just as easily have been pedestrians in the area at the time?
This afternoon, it was a little of both. There were people who did get out in time, and there were people who just happened to be caught on the street. At this point, they're not even sure how many more critically injured people are coming in. They've just been amassed in one of the meeting rooms here down at the harbor, and some of them are coming out with big boxes of medical equipment. So right now, nobody knows how many people are coming in or how many ferries have been put into work tonight.
But do you get the sense that there actually is an operation at the scene of what were the World Trade Center towers to try to rescue people who might still be alive there?
There is that sense. Everybody's being pretty realistic and not. I don't want to say not holding out too much hope, but just not making any judgments as to who's coming in and where they're coming from. Whether it's from the building itself. Right now, the hospitals in New York are just overwhelmed. So this seems to be ferrying people seems to be the most efficacious way of getting people the help they need and to a hospital as quickly as possible.
Well, Carrie, thank you very much for telling
Thank
us
you.
about it. Carrie Nolan of member station WNYC reporting to us from the Jersey side of New York Harbor. She's at Atlantic Highlands in New Jersey.
Here in Washington, rescue crews are at work at this hour at the Pentagon. They're looking for survivors from this morning's attacks and starting the grim effort to recover bodies. NPR's Steve Inskeep joins us from the Pentagon. Steve, the latest there?
Noah, it appears again that perhaps the fire is under control, at least from our vantage point. Officials earlier in the evening declared this fire to be under control. Up there it goes again. Over the last half hour, however, Noah, the fire has begun bursting through the Pentagon roof again and again, a great distance, in fact, from the place where the plane originally struck. And once again, right now, we are seeing tongues of flame licking up into the sky and smoke continuing to rise from the building. As that happens, more rescuers are arriving. They are bringing what appears to be cadaver dogs, bringing in cranes. Army troops are coming in, convoy after convoy of people to try to begin working through that rubble and see what they can find.
Any estimate about how many people may have been killed in that plane crash?
The Associated Press is giving us a number based from a Pentagon official of perhaps 100, but I have to say, I mean, based on any experience from covering disasters, that's got to be a wild guess at this point. The military is trying to get a handle on how many people really were in the building, asking people to call. One thing that may keep the casualty number lower than it might otherwise have been is that we are told that a portion of the building where the plane struck had been recently renovated and not all the offices were filled.
The question occurs today, why didn't somebody try to shoot down that aircraft as it came screaming into the Pentagon?
Well, I think there are maybe two answers to that, although we're speculating a little here. One, eyewitnesses who talked to me said this plane flew in very low, which means you would not see it from miles and miles away. You would have a very short time to react and try to get a missile, a shoulder-fired missile, or whatever the Pentagon, whatever the military may have had on the roof to shoot at that. The second thing is, we heard in the newscast at the top of the hour, Noah, that the transponders on these planes were shut off. The transponder is a device on the plane that communicates with the ground, makes it easier to find it on the radar, which means that any early warning radar, any military or civilian radar, would have had great difficulty tracking that plane and getting an early sense that it was heading someplace that it should not have gone.
And at this hour, this evening, what is the military response to this day?
General Hugh Shelton told us, your armed forces are ready. And I think that's the bottom line. Officials made it clear to us that either they do not know yet or are not willing to say yet who they think is responsible for this, but they are prepared, I would presume, to respond with maximum force, not only, as we heard from Don Gagne, against the terrorists if they can be found, but any nation that may have helped them.
Thank you, Steve.
Happy to help.
NPR's Steve Inskeep talking with us from the Pentagon. You're listening to special coverage of today's terrorist attacks from NPR News.
From NPR News, special coverage of today's terrorist attacks in New York City and in Washington, D.C. I'm Linda Wertheimer.
And I'm Noah Adams. We're joined now by Hassan Astana, a professor of structural engineering at the University of California in Berkeley. He joins us from San Francisco. Professor Astana, let's talk a bit about these 110-story twin World Trade Center towers collapsing, almost imploding. What do you see when you watch that videotape?
What I saw was what we call a classic case of progressive collapse. What happened here was not really a collapse of a structure due to impact of the plane. The plane hitting the structure, in fact, was no match to the strength and mass of this structure. The weight of plane and the structure of plane is very, very weak compared to the structure itself. So in this case, the plane must have disintegrated. But what happened was that plane was certainly containing large amount of jet fuel and perhaps explosives, we don't know. And that fuel being delivered to the structure caused the top 20 stories of this structure, in both cases almost, to catch fire and burn for about 1 hour or so. What happened then is that as the fire was going on, these are steel structures, and steel structure is very resilient against impact. So they did not collapse due to initial impact. But in this case, the fire went on, and steel is a material that when temperature goes up and it becomes hot, about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, then the steel loses its strength to carry the load. So what you had here was, it was very clear on the video that we saw this morning, it was very clear that the top 20 story was burning, and the columns at the bottom of those 20 stories, which is about 90th floor, those columns collapsed due to intense heat. And when that happened after 1 hour of initial impact, then the whole 20-story top portion of structure collapsed like what we call rigid body, like a big box, I calculated weighing about 40,000 tons, falling on the top of this 90-story building now that is underneath.
And that is the building underneath has probably been weakened by the aviation fuel that's been leaking down through the...
Perhaps we couldn't see from my view when I was looking at the video. It was not clear if there was any damage actually to the lower floors. I couldn't see any even glass broken or any dust coming out of lower floors. It looked to me that lower floors were not impacted. And I heard from a colleague of mine that actually they had engineers at the 91st floor, and they were able actually to walk out and get out of the building before it collapsed. So it seems that the lower 90 stories did not have much damage, but the top 20 stories or so were burning. And when that 20-story mass collapsed on lower 90 stories, then of course that 90-story structure was not designed to take that kind of impact, and it was kind of like hammering on top of that building with that much weight, and it collapsed completely under gravity. So it is really a case of progressive collapse due to fire that went on for an hour or so, and it weakened the columns. And when the top portion collapsed, it collapsed on the lower part and collapsed the whole structure.
Professor Astani, thank you for talking with us.
You're very welcome.
Hassan Astani is a professor of structural engineering at the University of California in Berkeley. He spoke with us from San Francisco.
We're joined now by former Senator Warren Rudman, who co-chaired with former Senator Gary Hart the U.S. Commission on National Security in the 21st century, the Hart-Rudman Commission, which completed its final report just this year in March. Senator Rudman, your report predicted, essentially, that something like this could happen, and I believe you said in your report that the question was not if a terrorist attack on the United States could happen, but when.
That's right, and we talked about two kinds of attacks. We talked about weapons of mass destruction and weapons of mass disruption, which is what we saw today.
Did you have any sense of what kind of attack the United States could expect? This was not one of those sophisticated biological weapons attacks. It was not nuclear weapons. It was instead sort of combining two things that terrorists have done in the past: suicide bombing and airplane hijackings.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about mass disruption, you're talking about using anything that is an instrumentality of high explosives, whether it be a truck, a tanker, an airplane, delivered against a target occupied mainly by civilians.
Can you shed any light on why the United States was vulnerable to such an apparently sophisticated and coordinated attack, that 4 different airplanes could be hijacked, sent after several targets, succeeding in 3 of them with apparently no warning from our intelligence services?
There are certain things which are very difficult to predict, and one of them is what terrorist organizations will do. It is one thing to have your intelligence apparatus focused on Iraq or China, but the bottom line is that these shadowy terrorist organizations, who are well-financed and very competent, given enough time with the people they have and the training they have, can carry off something like this as we saw today. So this really should not surprise anyone unless people have not been following what we know about these folks, which is quite a bit.
And do you think there's any reason to believe that the United States can protect itself against this kind of event in the future?
Well, the major recommendation we made was that this threat was the number one threat to this country, and we've laid out a whole list of things that have to be done. We believe strongly that all of the disparate government organizations that respond to this sort of event have to be coordinated. We have testified before the Congress as to the need for a Homeland Security agency. We have talked about the need to change focus of U.S. intelligence. And having said all that, I'm not sure you can prevent all of it. You can prevent some of it, but certainly the response, if this is going to continue in America, and it well might over the years, this is not like a war where you have a winner or a loser. This can go on indefinitely until the terrorists decide to turn their attention somewhere else.
Is there anything that the United States can do in terms of retaliation that might stop or reduce the threat?
Whether it can or it can't, we will, I'm sure, retaliate if we know whom to retaliate against. One of the great difficulties right now, everybody wants to point to a particular terrorist organization, and that may be right. But I would caution a little restraint on that until we have some information, and I'm sure that information will be forthcoming. But once we know that, yes, it's possible to retaliate, but you want to retaliate with the right amount of force against the right place.
Senator Redmond, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Former Senator Warren Rudman, he co-chaired with former Senator Gary Hart the U.S. Commission on National Security in the 21st Century, the Hart-Rudman Commission. We reached him here in Washington.
Back in a moment with more coverage of today's attacks on New York and Washington, D.C. from NPR News.
Listen to NPR News all night long and through the day tomorrow for updates on the devastating terrorist attacks on the United States. We'll have the latest details on those killed and injured and more information on how the attacks are affecting life in New York and Washington and around the country. Continuing coverage of the terrorist assaults on the United States tomorrow on NPR News.
This is special coverage from NPR News. I'm Linda Wertheimer.
And I'm Noah Adams. This morning, the worst terrorist attack in history. The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City were destroyed.
Hijacked airliners crashed into each of the towers. Shortly afterward, another commercial airliner crashed into the Pentagon here in Washington.
We'll have reaction from around the country. That is coming up from NPR News after this update.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Ann Taylor. In the worst terrorist attacks ever against targets in the United States, hijacked commercial planes were used this morning against the World Trade Center in New York City and the Pentagon. 2 airplanes hit the Trade Center, a third hit the Pentagon, and a 4th airplane crashed outside of Pittsburgh. A passenger in the 4th plane reported on a cell phone that aircraft had been hijacked. The death toll from the crashes alone is 266 people. This evening, President Bush spoke to the nation from the White House Oval Office, saying the attacks were what he termed despicable acts of terror. He said a search is underway for those responsible. NPR's Brian Naylor reports.
The president spoke briefly in a nationally broadcast address. Today, he said, our nation saw evil. He called the attacks acts of mass murder in which thousands of lives had been lost. But he said the attacks failed, and Mr. Bush pledged the U.S. would spare no effort to find those responsible.
I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
Mr. Bush had earlier returned to the White House after spending parts of the day at military bases in Louisiana and Nebraska. The president said federal government offices closed down after the attacks will reopen Wednesday. Brian Naylor, NPR News, Washington.
Also this evening, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld held a news briefing at the Pentagon, saying it will be open for business as usual tomorrow. He said the casualties from the attack in the Pentagon will not be few, but he said it's too early to give estimates. And as NPR's Steve Inskeep says, the secretary also said the U.S. military is on highest alert.
The United States Armed Forces around the world are on the highest possible readiness alert. It's called Force Protection Delta. And essentially that just means the highest possible alert for the protection of the forces themselves. And we're told that U.S. military forces at every base around the world are on the highest level of alert. There is no suggestion here that U.S. officials believe that there's another attack coming or that there isn't, but they want to make it clear to the world that they are ready.
NPR's Steve Inskeep reporting from the Pentagon. U.S. financial markets will be closed again tomorrow after this morning's attack on the World Trade Center. The New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and the American Stock Exchange suspended trading. Now, in a statement, say they will continue to be closed tomorrow. After conferring with the SEC, another announcement will be made tomorrow about future trading. The London Stock Exchange says it will be open tomorrow for trading as normal in the wake of the attacks in New York City and also in Washington. This is NPR News. In a move to reassure financial markets, the Federal Reserve says in the wake of terrorist attacks, the Fed is ready to provide additional money to banks if needed. In a statement, the Fed said the Federal Reserve System is open and operating. The promise to supply additional money to the banking system was similar to one made on the morning after the October 1987 stock market crash. That statement was given a large amount of credit for helping to restore calm to shaky financial markets. Fed officials say the Federal Reserve Board Chairman Alan Greenspan was out of the country today attending a banking conference in Switzerland, but is kept appraised of developments. The death toll from the terrorist attack in the World Trade Center in New York is not known. Final figures may not be known for days, but officials think more than 200 firefighters and police officers may be among those killed. Chris Malone of member station WFUV has more on the story.
Preliminary death toll numbers are nothing less than staggering. A New York City firefighter union official says as many as 200 firefighters were killed in the fire and collapse of the World Trade Center buildings. That's roughly half of the emergency personnel initially deployed to the scene in the morning. The union official says entire companies of firefighters are missing. Meanwhile, a police source says scores of police officers are missing and feared dead. New York's Cardinal Egan, who administered last rites to a dozen victims, said the firefighters and police were, quote, dead in great numbers. Chris Maloney, NPR News, New York.
In addition to disruptions in air travel, Greyhound suspended intercity bus service in much of the nation. A spokeswoman says that bus service has been canceled along much of the East Coast. I'm Ann Taylor, NPR News, Washington.
From NPR News, this is special coverage of today's terrorist attacks on U.S. targets. I'm Robert Siegel in New York.
In Washington, I'm Linda Wertheimer.
And I'm Noah Adams. This has been a day of almost indescribable devastation. Starting with the morning hijacking of two jets that were steered into two towers of the World Trade Center in New York. Those skyscrapers were totally destroyed by the attacks. No one can say how many hundreds or thousands of people may have died. Shortly afterwards, another hijacked plane crashed into the Pentagon in Northern Virginia. Both Washington and New York were nearly shut down by the terrorist assaults. Tonight, President Bush addressed the nation.
Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature. And we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks.
President Bush speaking this evening from the White House.
We turn now to NPR's Melissa Block, who is about as close as you can get tonight to the World Trade Center. Melissa, where are you and what do you see?
I'm standing on the West Side Highway, which is just north of the World Trade Center. It's where the emergency services have set up their vehicles, and when there's calls for them to go in, they're going in. I just saw a procession of earth-moving equipment and large cranes go in, about 3 bulldozers and 2 huge cranes. I've heard that they're going to try to move some of the rubble in the vehicles from the area. There are a number of firefighters here who I've been talking to who are down there putting out fires. Described, it's been a little confusing about what actually is left of the Trade Center towers. They were 110 stories tall, and they collapsed, obviously, this afternoon, earlier this morning. The firefighters who I spoke to who were on the scene said that they are now reduced to about 5 or 6 stories of rubble.
Certainly much smaller than what they were. There have been reports that first wave of emergency workers that went into the World Trade Center, firefighters, police, that there could be hundreds of them lost now and unaccounted for. What do you hear about that?
That's right. That's the concern here, and those numbers we still do not know. I talked to a National Guard a member of the National Guard from Dover, New Jersey, who had gone in, sitting on the sidewalk, completely shaken. He said he'd never been in combat before, but this is about as close as he can imagine getting. He was down there trying to pick through the rubble to find any survivors. They did find some. This was early on today. People probably who had been outside the building. He was hearing cries for help. He described a woman whom they had found who was completely covered in blood. She did not remember her name. He said she was half naked, stripped of her clothes from the force of the blast. And you see just wave upon wave of firefighters. You might hear some applause right now. Those are Salvation Army volunteers who are applauding the firefighters who are trudging from the scene, caked in debris. Their heads are bowed. They're carrying axes and picks. This has obviously just been a tragic day for the New York City Fire Department and the police department.
Melissa, what is the air like there? Is there still that terrible cloud hanging over Lower Manhattan?
There is, all over the southern Manhattan. You just get the strong stench of acrid smoke that's everywhere. After the 2 main towers collapsed later in the afternoon, there was the collapse of another building at the Trade Center. There are also any number of smaller fires. The fire department's been putting out cars that were set on fire, other buildings that have been set on fire down there. It wasn't just, obviously, the 2 towers, but surrounding buildings that were affected by this, and the whole area is just still thick with smoke.
The president's message earlier this evening was that America reopens for business tomorrow. It doesn't sound like the financial district reopens for business tomorrow.
No time soon. This is just I can't begin to describe, and obviously I haven't been there to be able to describe it, but the people who have been in there and are describing what they've seen said you would not recognize it. It just did not look anything like what the tip of Lower Manhattan used to look like.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks, Robert.
NPR's Melissa Block reporting from Lower Manhattan, from the West Side Highway, close to the World Trade Center.
Of the 4 planes hijacked today, 1 did not reach the hijackers' intended destination. United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco crashed outside Pittsburgh. There were 45 people on board when the jet slammed into a grassy field. NPR's John Itzty is about a quarter of a mile from the crash site in south-central Pennsylvania. It's about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. John, I understand the FBI are there at the site now. What sort of work is going on tonight?
Well, tonight, they're just gridding out the area, but not doing any real searching. The NTSB arrives tonight. Tomorrow morning, they'll go over the area very carefully, trying to find evidence and remains. Hopefully, they'll find the flight data recorders and the flight voice recorders, and that they'll tell us something about what actually happened on Flight 93.
John, is there any area this is an area of speculation, I know, but is there anyone talking about where the hijackers could have been wanting to take this particular plane?
Well, there's speculation. Obviously, it wasn't in this field. There's certainly nothing of great symbolic importance there. It's not the heart of capitalism. It's not the headquarters of the U.S. military. There's some speculation that it might have been headed for Camp David. Some media, as I understand it, are reporting that the jet may have gone beyond this area into Cleveland airspace, then asked to be rerouted to Washington. And so maybe there was a target in Washington. We really don't know. There are also reports that there was a cell phone call from a lavatory on the airplane, and that the caller called 911 and said the plane had been hijacked. It wasn't a hoax. And then later said that there was a fire in the cockpit and that the call ended abruptly. Now, the FBI confirms that there was a 911 call that they're very interested in. They've seized some tapes, 911 tapes from a site in western Pennsylvania, but we can't confirm really the nature of that call.
That call came, you say, from a passenger?
Apparently, reportedly from a passenger. But again, the FBI isn't confirming anything. They're only saying they're aware of a 911 call, that tapes have been confiscated.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Noah.
NPR's John Itzty talking with us from central Pennsylvania.
As people across the country watched and heard news of today's events unfold, they called their neighbors and relatives, hoping no one they knew had been hurt, and trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. NPR's Lynn Neary reports.
The images took a moment to absorb. It was the World Trade Center, but what was happening to it? Why was smoke pouring out of it? How could two planes have hit it within such a short amount of time? Then, a sickening feeling as reality sunk in, and the terrible news kept coming. The Pentagon on fire, rumors that the White House had been struck, and the State Department. Government buildings all over Washington were being evacuated, and just outside, right in front of this building, the fear was palpable.
Get back!
Yes, get back!
Well, I think we'll take their advice. Let's get back.
A van without a driver was parked in the middle of the street. The police were checking it for explosives and cordoning off the street, only adding to the confusion as office workers emptied out of nearby government buildings and tried to find a way to get home. Cindy Cheeks works for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
They told us to leave now, and we don't have anywhere to go. That's why I'm standing here looking stupid.
Where are you supposed to go?
Husband, home, Maryland. I can't get home. It's no metros running. It's no buses running. Look at all the congestion out here.
What's your reaction to all this, Cindy?
I'm scared. I'm frightened, really. It's horrible.
By noon, most public transportation was running, and a strange calm replaced the panic. A young woman named Becky took a cigarette break and contemplated the empty streets as the last workers left the building she manages.
It's very surreal around here, I think, right now. People are in shock. It's almost like an eerie sort of quiet, like it's too hard to believe that this is really happening.
Bob Sauerwein remembers what it was like on April 19, 1995, when a huge bomb exploded in his hometown. Sauerwein runs a small cafeteria near where the Alfred P. Murrah building once stood in Oklahoma City.
I was here during the bombing when the memorial was down there, and this building here shook as well. So I can imagine what them people in New York are going through right now. I just, it just tears my heart out when things like this happen to our country.
At the Oklahoma City Memorial, Executive Director Carrie Watkins says the staff wanted to stay open all day, but few visitors came, and by afternoon she decided to close down for safety reasons. Just as they were 6 years ago, says Watkins, the reverberations from today's attack will be felt across the country.
It leaves people with a sense of uncertainty. It leaves people with a sense of pride for their country. And I think as Americans, we unite together and take a stand that we will not let terrorists defeat us. They'll hurt us. They'll break our hearts. They'll, hurt our souls, but they're not going to defeat us as a country.
As stunning a blow as the Oklahoma City bombing was, today's attacks on the nation's capital and the country's financial center seem to have a more devastating effect on the national psyche. Deborah Margulies heard the news in Philadelphia.
The whole world looks to New York, and in 18 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour, they shut our country down. That I think is a little scary.
Brendan Olkus, a young DJ who works in a club in Philly, says his sense of the world will never be the same.
26 years old. I've lived pretty much my entire life in a relative state of peace. But I've always felt I've always felt safe, and I don't know that I've ever felt really patriotic. I mean, I've just sort of felt like I've existed. And today was the first time I ever felt like, wow, my homeland has been attacked.
Some sought refuge in prayer.
Let's pray, O God, giver of solace in the presence and hope for the future.
About a dozen people attended this prayer service at the Episcopal Cathedral of St. Mark in Salt Lake City, Utah. Michael Mitchell, a native of Utah, had just moved back after living in New York for 9 years.
I've been on the internet all day trying to be in touch with my friends, and she can't get through by phone. I've just been trying to be in touch with people and see if they're all right.
Now, says Mitchell, like most people, he's wondering about the U.S. response.
I'm scared now that we're going to retaliate in a way that's going to pull us into something much, much deeper. And that's something that really scares me. We then get in a state of, retaliation, and it just escalates. As I was sitting here today during the prayer service, I was thinking, how can we begin the forgiveness process right away? And still grieve and still have, that righteous anger and still try and set things right. But I don't know that necessarily means that we, bomb the hell out of whoever did it.
It will take a long time for the emotions of today to settle in, for people to fully absorb what happened. But in the minutes and hours after the attacks occurred, there was a sharp sense of violation and a keen sense of uncertainty about what lies ahead. Lynn Neary, NPR News, Washington.
That's the end of the recording that I made on the evening of 9/11/2001. I recorded this on a cassette tape on a large boom box that I had. My television was on the blink at the time, and right after the attacks happened, my neighbor, who was also my landlord, motioned for me to come over and see something inside of his apartment because he knew that my television didn't work. And so we watched what was unfolding in New York City live on television in his apartment. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you holding on until the end of this.